I am 71 years old, and until last spring, I believed I had already survived the worst thing life could hand me, burying my husband of 46 years. I was wrong. The worst thing was standing in my son's living room, holding a shadow box with shattered glass and a missing silver star, while my daughter-in-law's friends giggled behind. Their wine glasses like nothing sacred had just been destroyed. My name is Patricia Hayes. Before I was anybody's grandmother, I was Staff Sergeant Patricia Hayes, United States Marine Corps, Communications Specialist, 1974 to 1980. Before that, I was a girl from a Midwest farm town who wanted more out of life than what the local diner could offer. And before all of that, I was the woman who fell in love with a boy named Walter Doyle at a county fair, a boy who would grow into Master Sergeant Walter Wally Doyle, USMC, 2 tours and places I still won't name out loud, a Purple Heart, a Silver Star, and a chest full of ribbons he never once bragged about. Wally passed 2 years ago. Heart failure, sudden, quiet, the way he wanted it. No fuss, no drama. Just gone one Tuesday morning while I was making coffee in the next room. I built a shadow box for his medals myself, sanded the walnut frame with my own hands, because some things you don't outsource to a hobby shop. That box sat on our mantle for as long as I lived in that house. When I finally agreed to downsize into a smaller condo near my son Michael's family, I didn't have room on my new walls for a piece that large. Michael offered to keep it at his house just until you're settled. Mom, I trusted him. I trusted his wife. That was my first mistake. Michael is my only child, and I love him the way you love the person who taught you what your heart was capable of holding. He married Brooke 6 years ago, a bright, ambitious young woman who works in marketing and always has an opinion about aesthetic. I never disliked Brooke. I just never quite understood her. She once asked me, with total sincerity, whether Wally's dog tags could be repurposed into a boho necklace, since vintage military stuff is so on trend right now. I laughed it off at the time. I shouldn't have. When I dropped the shadow box off at their house in Maple Ridge, a quiet Midwest suburb outside Columbus, Brooke assured me it would go straight into the guest room closet, wrapped and protected, until I had proper wall space. I hugged her, thanked her, and drove home with an empty back seat and a strange tightness in my chest that I chalked up to sentimentality. It was not sentimentality. It was instinct, and I should have listened to it. 3 weeks later, Brooke hosted what she called a vintage housewarming soiree. Her words, not mine, lifted directly off the invitation she posted to her social media. 20-some friends, string lights, a signature cocktail named after some neighborhood cul-de-sac, and apparently a curated display of antique-looking decor scattered around the house for ambiance. I do not know about any of this until my neighbor's daughter, who happens to follow Brooke online, sent me a photo with a message that simply read, "Mrs. Hayes, isn't this your husband's stuff?" The photo showed my husband's purple heart sitting in a martini glass on the kitchen island, being used as a garnish prop for a photo booth. Behind it, propped against a vase of eucalyptus, was the shadow box itself, glass cracked down the center, the velvet lining stained with what I can only assume was red wine, and the silver star nowhere in the frame at all. I did not cry. I want to be very clear about that, because I know how this story is supposed to go. The wounded old widow, weeping over broken glass. That is not what happened. What happened is that 30 years of military discipline snapped into place inside me like a swish being thrown. I felt my pulse slow. I felt my mind go quiet and sharp. The exact same feeling I used to get when a comes line went down mid-operation, and panicking wasn't an option, only fixing it was. I called my closest friend from my Marine Corps days. a woman named Dolores, who now runs the local VFW auxiliary chapter with the same iron precision. She once ran a supply depot. Dolores has seen every kind of disrespect this world can dish out toward the people who served, and she has never once let it slide quietly. "Patricia," she said, after I described the photo to her, "you get every scrap of evidence you can before you say a single word to that family. Screenshots, timestamps, names of who was there. You do not go in swinging emotional. You go in with a file folder thick enough to end an argument before it starts. I have never taken advice faster in my life." I spent the next 4 days doing what I used to do best, gathering intelligence, quietly and methodically. I did not confront Brooke. I did not confront Michael. I smiled through a phone call with my son where he mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the housewarming went great, Mom. You should have seen the turnout. I saw the turnout, Michael. I saw exactly what your wife's friends did to your father's silver star, while they sipped drinks garnished with his purple heart. I scrolled through every photo Brooke's friends had posted publicly. One image showed a woman named Kayla, Brooke's maid of honor, as it turned out, using several of Wally's ribbon bars as poker chips during a backyard card game, laughing as she stacked them into little piles. Another showed the missing silver star sitting at the bottom of an ice bucket, someone having decided it made such a cute little garnish tray. A third, the one that finally cracked something open in my chest, showed a young man I didn't recognize wearing Wally's service cap sideways, mugging for the camera with a drink in hand. Captioned, "Vintage vibes only." I saved every image. I noted every name I could identify. I called the jeweler in town who had done minor repair work on military medals before and asked him, hypothetically, what it would cost to restore or replace a lost silver star through proper military channels. The number was not small, and more importantly, the process was not simple. A silver star isn't something you order off a website. It requires documentation, verification, and time, precisely because it is meant to mean something. Then I called the one person who could turn quiet evidence into unavoidable consequence. My daughter-in-law's own employer. Brooke worked for a mid-sized marketing firm that had, only weeks earlier, won a fairly public contract to help rebrand the county's Memorial Day Parade Committee a contract. Brooke herself had proudly announced at Sunday dinner, beaming about how meaningful it was to her to give back to veterans in her own creative way. I did not have to manufacture the irony. Brooke had handed it to me herself. I did not go to her boss. I am not in the business of destroying a young woman's career over carelessness, however painful that carelessness was. What I did instead was request that Michael and Brooke join me for dinner, my treat, at a quiet Italian place downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and low enough noise that nothing gets lost in translation. I brought a folder. Inside it were printed photographs, each one labeled with a small sticky note in my own handwriting, date taken, person identified, item damaged. I set it on the table between the breadsticks and the wine list, and I let it sit there for a full minute before I said a word. "Mom, what is this?" Michael asked, already pale, because my son has known since childhood that when I go quiet like that, something serious is coming. "This," I said, sliding the folder toward Brooke, "is your housewarming soiree." I watched the color drain out of her face page by page. The martini glass, the ice bucket, the poker chips made from a dead man's ribbon bars. She started to say something about how she didn't realize how the box must have gotten moved out of the closet by someone else. How she never would have. "Brooke," I said, and I kept my voice level. The same voice. I once used to walk a panicked young corporal through communications failure without letting him hear a single crack of fear in it. "I am not here to yell at you. I'm 71 years old, and I have buried a husband. I do not have the energy left in me for yelling. I am here to tell you what those items were, so that the next time somebody hands you something wrapped in tissue paper and asks you to put it in a closet, you understand exactly what you're holding. I told her about the Purple Heart earned the day Wally took shrapnel protecting two younger Marines pinned down under fire, a story he only told me once, late one night, 20 years into our marriage, and never repeated again. I told her about the Silver Star, awarded for actions he refused to describe in detail. Even to me, actions that 3 separate men had, over the years, quietly thanked him for reunions I wasn't meant to fully understand. I told her the ribbon bars her maid of honor had turned into poker chips, represented campaigns, commendations, and years of a young man's life spent somewhere his own mother didn't sleep well at night. These were never decorations, I said. They were never vintage. They were the physical proof that a 19-year-old boy from Ohio went somewhere terrible and came home anyway, and somebody turned him into a garnish. Michael did not say a word through most of this. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. Mom, I had no idea any of this happened. I would have. I know, I said, because I did know. My son has his father's steadiness in him, and I have never once doubted his respect for what Wally carried. This was never about Michael. Brooke, to her credit, and I want to be fair here, because this story only means something if I tell the truth of it, did not try to argue her way out. She sat with a folder in front of her for a long moment, and when she looked up, her eyes were wet in a way that felt earned rather than performed. I'll fix this, she said. Whatever it costs, however long it takes. I'll find the Silver Star if it's still in that house somewhere, and if it's not, I will personally go through whatever process it takes to replace it. And I want to apologize to your friends Chapter 2, in person, not just to you. I told her that was a start. I did not tell her it was enough, because it wasn't, not yet. Trust, once cracked, doesn't glue back together over one dinner and a sincere face. But I gave her the chance to prove it, because I raised my son to believe in second chances that are actually earned, not just declared. Over the following month, Brooke did exactly what she said she would. She tracked down Kayla and the others who'd been at that party, and I found out much later, from Dolores, who has ears everywhere. In this town, she made every single one of them chip in toward the costs of a proper restoration and replacement process for the missing Silver Star through the correct veteran affairs channel. It took nearly 10 weeks, several notarized statements, and more paperwork than I think Brooke had filled out in her entire adult life. When the replacement medal finally arrived, she did not simply hand it to me. She asked if she could be there when I rebuilt the shadow box, and she sat beside me at my kitchen table for 3 hours while I resanded the cracked walnut frame, watching quietly, asking questions about Wally I don't think she'd ever thought to ask before. She also, true to her word, drove out to the VFW auxiliary chapter with a box of framed, handwritten apology letters, one from each friend who had been at that party and stood in front of Dolores and a dozen veterans twice her age to say, out loud, that she had learned the difference between decoration and dedication. What I learned, people sometimes assume that when you get older, you get softer, that grief and time file down your edges until you're something easy to overlook. I understand why they think that. I am, after all, a grandmother now, a woman who bakes too many cookies and forgets where she put her reading glasses twice a day. But there is a version of me that never retired, the version who once kept a communications line open, under pressure that would have broken most people, the version who married a man because he was steady in the exact places the World tried hardest to break him. That version of me does not disappear just because. I've traded my uniform for a cardigan. She was sitting quietly at that dinner table with a folder full of photographs, waiting for the moment she was needed. And when Brooke's friends decided my husband's silver star made a cute garnish, they weren't dealing with a fragile old widow who would simply cry and let it go. They were dealing with a Marine. The shadow box sits back on my mantel now, glass unbroken, every metal accounted for. The walnut frame, a little more weathered than before, but sturdier, for having been rebuilt by hand. Brooke visits more often these days. Not out of guilt, I think, but because something between us actually shifted. That night at the Italian restaurant, last month, she asked if I would come speak to her firm's Veteran Outreach Committee about what those ribbons and stars actually mean to the families who keep them. I said yes. Some lessons only land when they cost something. Brooks cost her nearly 2 months, and a very humbling afternoon in front of a room full of veterans. Mine cost me a moment of watching my husband's legacy sitting in an ice bucket like a party favor. But I'll tell you this, Wally would have found the whole thing darkly funny, in that quiet way of his, and then he would have told me, the same way he always did after a hard day, "You handled it right, Pat. You always do." If you enjoyed this story, stick around. There are more tales here about family, quiet strength, and the kind of justice that doesn't need to shout to be heard.